For 300 years, humanity had spread across the stars in silence, building colonies on distant worlds and trading with alien species who barely noticed their existence. And in all that time, no one in the galaxy considered humans to be anything special or dangerous or worthy of attention. Galactic Concord was a coalition of 12 ancient species who had ruled the stars for millions of years. And they viewed humanity as children playing in the cosmic sandbox, harmless and unremarkable, and destined to remain forever in the shadow of greater civilizations. Commander Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the starship Valiant and watched the stars drift past the viewport as his crew went about their duties with quiet efficiency. And he remembered how proud he had felt when he first took command of this vessel 5 years ago. The communication officer turned from her console with a look of confusion on her face and said that they were receiving a distress signal from the colony world of New Virginia. And the signal was fragmented and desperate, and unlike anything she had ever heard before. Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach as he ordered the helmsman to change course immediately. And the Valiant turned toward New Virginia at maximum speed while the crew prepared for whatever emergency awaited them. 7 million human souls called New Virginia home. And Nathan had visited the planet twice during supply runs, remembered the green forests and blue oceans and the children playing in the streets of the capital city when the Valiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered the New Virginia system. Nathan Cole felt his heart stop beating for a moment as he stared at the viewport in absolute horror. There was nothing left but ash and ruin and the blackened remains of what had once been a thriving world. And the forests were gone, and the oceans had boiled away, and the cities were nothing but craters filled with radioactive debris. The communication officer was crying at her station as she reported that there were no life signs anywhere on the planet, and 7 million people had been reduced to dust in what appeared to be a matter of hours. Nathan ordered his crew to search for survivors, even though he knew in his heart that there would be none. And the Valiant spent 3 days scanning the dead world while the crew struggled to comprehend what had happened. The answer came from the wreckage of a defense satellite that had managed to transmit a final recording before it was destroyed. And the recording showed ships unlike anything in the Galactic Concord database descending on New Virginia and unleashing weapons that turned the atmosphere to fire. The ships belonged to the Kethari Dominion, a species of insectoid conquerors who had been silent for 10,000 years and whom everyone had assumed were extinct or had simply faded away into the darkness between galaxies. Nathan Cole sent his report to Earth with hands that trembled with rage and grief. And he knew that New Virginia was only the beginning of something terrible. Within 6 standard months, the Kethari burned 17 human colonies across 3 sectors of space, and 43 million men and women and children died screaming as their worlds were reduced to cinders. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session to discuss the crisis, and the 12 elder species expressed their deepest sympathies and offered their sincere condolences to the human delegation. But when the human ambassador asked for military assistance or weapons or anything that might help them survive, the Concord representatives fell silent and looked away and explained that intervening in conflicts between younger species was against their ancient law as humanity was on its own against an enemy that had already killed more people than any war in human history. And the elder species of the galaxy fully expected to watch another young civilization be exterminated like so many before. Admiral Lisa Harper stood before the United Earth Council in the Great Chamber beneath the mountains of Geneva and looked at the faces of the men and women who would decide the fate of their species. She was 62 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen combat on 3 different worlds. and she had spent her entire career hoping that humanity would never again have to fight a war of survival. The council members looked exhausted and afraid as they waited for her assessment, and Lisa could see that some of them had already given up hope and were simply going through the motions. Lisa took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the chamber, telling them that the Cathari believed humans were weak because humanity had chosen peace over war and cooperation over conquest. She told them that the enemy expected humans to beg for mercy or flee into the darkness or simply accept their extinction the way so many other species had done throughout galactic history. And then Lisa Harper smiled a cold and terrible smile and said that the Cathari had made a fatal error in judgment that would cost them everything they had ever built. Humanity had not been peaceful because they were incapable of violence, she explained. And humanity had not been quiet because they lacked the will to fight. Humanity had chosen peace because they remembered too well what they were capable of when they embraced war. And the history of Earth was written in blood and fire, and the screams of the conquered. The council members leaned forward in their seats as Lisa continued speaking, and she could see the fear in their eyes slowly being replaced by something harder and more dangerous. She told them that the Cathari had awakened something that should have been left sleeping, and now humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you pushed a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to destroy itself. The vote was unanimous, and within hours, the order went out to every human world and station and ship across the known galaxy. Total war had been declared against the Cathari Dominion, and humanity would not stop fighting until every last one of the enemy had been destroyed or until humans themselves ceased to exist. Commander Nathan Cole received the declaration aboard the Valiant and felt something shift inside his chest as he read the words on his screen. He thought about the 7 million dead on New Virginia and the 43 million more who had followed them into oblivion, and he made a promise to himself that their deaths would not go unavenged. The sleeping monster had opened its eyes, and across the galaxy humanity began to transform into something that would terrify every species that witnessed it. Factories that had produced consumer goods and luxury items retooled overnight to manufacture weapons and warships, and universities that had studied art and philosophy became laboratories dedicated to finding new ways to kill. Every human world mobilized with a singular purpose that the Galactic Concord had never seen before, and the elder species watched in growing horror as the harmless children they had dismissed began to bare their teeth. The Cathari had wanted a war of extermination, and humanity was going to give them exactly what they asked for. The transformation of human civilization happened faster than anyone in the galaxy thought possible, and within 3 months, the shipyards of Earth and Mars and a dozen colony worlds were producing warships at a rate that made the Galactic Concord deeply uncomfortable. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his cruiser and watched his fleet assemble at the edge of the Proxima system, and he counted 47 ships under his command against the 130 Cathari vessels that had come to burn another human world. His officers looked nervous as they reported the enemy numbers, and Daniel could see the doubt in their eyes as they wondered if this battle would end the same way as all the others. Daniel was 38 years old, with dark skin and a scar across his jaw from a training accident years ago, and he had never imagined that he would be leading humanity's first major counteroffensive against an enemy that had already killed millions. The Cathari fleet moved toward Proxima Station with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat, and their insectoid commanders fully expected the humans to retreat or surrender when faced with overwhelming force. That was what the Concord species always did, and the Cathari had spent 10,000 years conquering civilizations that valued survival over honor. Daniel opened the channel to his entire fleet and spoke in a calm voice that hid the fear pounding in his chest, telling his crews that he would not order them to retreat, no matter what happened in the next few hours. He told them that every human who had died on New Virginia and the other colonies was watching them from whatever afterlife existed, and those dead souls were waiting to see if their living brothers and sisters would avenge them or join them in oblivion. And then Daniel Harris gave the order to advance, and 47 human ships accelerated toward an enemy fleet that outnumbered them nearly 3-1. The Cathari commanders were confused at first because no species in their long history had ever charged directly into certain death, and they assumed the humans were bluffing or had some secret weapon that would even the odds. But there was no secret weapon, and there was no bluff, and the human fleet crashed into the Cathari formation like a hammer striking glass. The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 19 hours of continuous fighting, and Daniel Harris led his ships through the enemy lines again and again while his crews fired every weapon they had until the barrels melted and the ammunition ran dry. Human ships exploded, and human sailors died by the thousands. But for every human vessel that fell, there were 3 Cathari ships tumbling through space as burning wreckage. Daniel lost his cruiser halfway through the battle and transferred his flag to a damaged destroyer that had lost half its crew. And he kept fighting even as the blood of his wounded officers stained the deck beneath his feet. When the sun rose over Proxima Station the next morning, the Cathari fleet was debris scattered across 1,000,000 kilometers of space, and Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his battered destroyer and wept for the friends he had lost. The galaxy watched the aftermath in stunned silence, and the Galactic Concord realized for the first time that they had completely misunderstood what humanity was capable of. Daniel Harris became the first human to earn the title of Demon Admiral among alien species, and his name was spoken with fear and respect in every corner of the known galaxy. But the war was far from over, and humanity knew that they needed to find the source of the Cathari threat if they wanted to end the conflict. Permanently, Lieutenant Megan Ross was a tactical analyst aboard the command carrier Defiance, and she spent her days studying captured Cathari data and trying to understand how the enemy thought and planned. Megan was 29 years old, with red hair and green eyes that had dark circles under them from too many sleepless nights, and she had lost her younger brother on one of the colony worlds that the Cathari had burned. She poured her grief into her work and analyzed every piece of information that human forces captured from enemy vessels, and slowly she began to notice patterns that no one else had seen. Cathari were not operating from their ancient homeworld, as everyone had assumed, and their fleet seemed to be receiving supplies and reinforcements from somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy. Megan dug deeper into the data and found references to a massive station hidden in the void between galaxies, a staging base where the Cathari had gathered their forces before launching their campaign of extermination. But that was not the most interesting thing she discovered in the captured files. There were coordinates in the Cathari religious texts that the enemy seemed to revere above all else, and these coordinates pointed to something in the darkness beyond known space that the Cathari believed would grant them ultimate power. Megan brought her findings to her commanding officer, who brought them to Admiral Lisa Harper, and within days, the entire human military leadership was discussing what to do with this information. Admiral Harper sat in her office on Earth and studied the data that Megan Ross had compiled, and she felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what the Cathari were truly seeking. The enemy was not simply trying to conquer human space or exterminate a rival species, and their campaign of genocide was just one part of a much larger plan that had been 10,000 years in the making. The Cathari believed that something ancient and powerful waited at those coordinates, and they were willing to burn entire civilizations to reach it. Lisa Harper made a decision that would change the course of galactic history, and she authorized a mission to find the Cathari stronghold and to investigate the mysterious coordinates before the enemy could claim whatever prize awaited their commander. Nathan Cole volunteered to lead the expeditionary force, and Lisa approved his request because she knew that no one had more reason to see this mission succeed. Nathan assembled a fleet of 50 ships, carrying 30,000 soldiers and scientists and support personnel, and he briefed his crews on what they would be facing in the void beyond the galaxy. No human had ever traveled so far from home, and Nathan told his people that many of them might not return from this journey, but the men and women under his command did not flinch or ask to be reassigned, and they understood that the fate of humanity might depend on what they found at those coordinates. The fleet departed from Earth orbit on a cold morning in December, and Nathan Cole watched his homeworld shrink to a blue dot and then disappear entirely as his ships accelerated into the unknown. Whatever the Cathari were searching for, humanity would find it first. The journey into the void took 8 months of travel through regions of space that no human had ever seen before, and Commander Nathan Cole spent many sleepless nights staring at the darkness outside his viewport and wondering what awaited his fleet at the end of their journey. The stars grew thin and scattered as they moved beyond the edge of the galaxy, and soon there was nothing but empty blackness stretching in every direction like an ocean without shores. Commander Chris Morton served as Nathan's second-in-command and handled the day-to-day operations of the fleet while Nathan focused on strategy and planning, and the two men had become close friends during the long voyage. Chris was 41 years old with a calm demeanor that helped keep the crew steady when fear and uncertainty threatened to overwhelm them, and Nathan trusted him more than anyone else in the fleet. The sensors began to malfunction as they traveled deeper into the void, and the navigation officers reported that their instruments were detecting things that should not exist in the empty space between galaxies. Crew members started having strange dreams about vast structures and ancient beings and voices that spoke in languages that had never been heard by human ears, and the ship doctors struggled to explain what was happening to their patients. Dr. Katie Shaw was the chief scientist of the expedition, and she spent her days studying the Cathari religious texts that Megan Ross had discovered, and she was the first person to understand what the enemy truly believed about the coordinates. Katie was 35 years old with short brown hair and glasses that she constantly pushed up her nose when she was thinking, and she had dedicated her life to understanding alien civilizations and their belief systems. She requested a meeting with Nathan and Chris and explained what she had learned from the Cathari texts, and her words painted a picture of something far stranger than anyone had imagined. The coordinates were sacred to the Cathari because they believed that at this location existed beings called the architects, and these architects were said to have seeded life across the entire universe billions of years ago. Cathari had spent 10,000 years searching for the architects because they believed that finding them would grant the Dominion the power to rule all existence. And every war they had fought and every species they had exterminated had been in service of this single goal. Nathan listened to Katie's explanation and felt a mixture of wonder and dread settling in his chest, and he asked her if she believed the architects were real or just a myth that the Cathari had invented to justify their conquests. Katie pushed her glasses up her nose and said that she did not know what they would find at the coordinates, but something had inspired the Cathari to spend millennia pursuing this quest, and that something might be very real and very dangerous. The fleet continued its journey through the void, and the dreams grew more intense and the sensor malfunctions became more frequent, and Nathan could feel his crews growing more anxious with each passing day. On the 243rd day of their voyage, The navigation officer shouted that they were approaching the coordinates, and Nathan rushed to the bridge to see what awaited them. What he saw through the viewport defied every expectation he had formed during the long months of travel. And Nathan Cole stood in stunned silence as his mind struggled to comprehend the scale of what floated before him. A megastructure hung in the void, and the word structure did not begin to capture what it truly was. Because this thing was larger than a solar system and covered in symbols that matched nothing in any human or alien database. The construction was clearly artificial and impossibly ancient. And Katie Shaw ran calculations on her instruments and reported that the megastructure might be older than the Milky Way galaxy itself. Nathan ordered his fleet to approach slowly while the scientists scanned the structure for any signs of life or activity. And the crews worked in hushed voices as if they were afraid of waking something that had been sleeping for billions of years. But they were not alone at the coordinates. And the sensors detected a massive fleet of ships waiting near the megastructure. Like wolves guarding a prize they had finally claimed, the Cathari Dominion had found the coordinates too. And their entire armada was assembled here in the darkness beyond known space. Over 1,000 warships and the Supreme Hive Queen herself aboard the largest vessel Nathan had ever seen. Chris Morton stood beside Nathan and counted the enemy ships with growing concern. And he said that they were outnumbered 20-1 and that there was no way they could fight their way through that fleet. Nathan stared at the megastructure and thought about the 43 million humans who had died because of the Cathari. And he thought about the coordinates that had promised something ancient and powerful. And he made his decision. He ordered his fleet to battle stations and told his crews that they had not traveled 8 months through the void to turn back at the threshold of their goal. The Cathari detected the human fleet and began to move their ships into attack formation. And the Supreme Hive Queen broadcast a message demanding that the humans surrender immediately or be destroyed. Nathan did not bother to respond, and instead he gave the order to advance toward the megastructure at full speed. The second battle of the void began with human ships diving into a sea of enemies, and Nathan watched his fleet scatter the first wave of Cathari defenders with weapons fire that lit up the darkness like artificial stars. Chris Morton coordinated the battle from the command center while Nathan led the assault personally. And the two friends worked together like they had been fighting side by side for their entire lives. Human ships exploded and Cathari vessels burned. And the void between galaxies became a graveyard of shattered metal and frozen bodies. And still the battle raged on with neither side willing to retreat. Nathan knew that his fleet could not survive a prolonged engagement against such overwhelming numbers. But he also knew that they only needed to reach the megastructure and discover what secrets it held. Whatever the architects had left behind, humanity was going to find it before the Cathari could claim it for themselves. The battle raged for 3 days without pause, and the void between galaxies became filled with debris and radiation, and the silent screams of dying ships as two civilizations fought for the right to claim an ancient prize. Sergeant Kevin Price led boarding parties onto enemy vessels because the human fleet needed to thin the Cathari numbers faster than ship-to-ship combat would allow. And Kevin and his soldiers fought claw to fist in corridors filled with acid and fire. Kevin was 32 years old with a shaved head and arms covered in scars from a dozen previous battles. And he had lost his wife and daughter on New Virginia and carried their photographs in a pocket over his heart. He killed Cathari soldiers with his rifle and his knife and his bare hands when his weapons failed. And his fury drove him forward through wave after wave of enemies until his armor was drenched in alien blood. Pilot Amy Brooks flew her fighter through swarms of Cathari interceptors and destroyed more enemy craft than any other pilot in the fleet. And when her ship was damaged beyond repair, she made a choice that would be remembered for generations. Amy was 26 years old and had dreamed of flying since she was a child. And she had always known that her life would end among the stars, but she had never imagined it would happen like this. She aimed her crippled fighter at the bridge of a HFY dreadnought and accelerated to maximum speed, and she ejected from her cockpit at the last possible second before her ship crashed through the enemy hull and detonated its remaining weapons. The dreadnought exploded in a ball of fire that consumed 3 smaller vessels nearby, and Amy drifted through the debris in her flight suit until a rescue shuttle found her hours later. Commander Nathan Cole watched the battle unfold from his flagship and calculated that his fleet had perhaps 6 hours before the HFY overwhelmed them completely, and he knew that he had to reach the megastructure before that happened. He assembled a strike team of his best soldiers and scientists and led them personally toward the ancient construction, while Chris Morton stayed behind to command the fleet. Nathan's shuttle dodged enemy fire and debris as it approached the megastructure, and the pilot found an opening in the outer shell that was large enough for them to enter. The interior of the structure was vast and dark, and filled with air that had somehow remained breathable for billions of years. And Nathan felt like an insect crawling through the holes of a god. Dr. Katie Shaw walked beside Nathan and scanned every surface with her instruments, and she reported that the technology around them was so advanced that her equipment could barely detect it. They walked for hours through corridors that stretched into infinity and chambers that could have held entire planets, and the silence pressed against them like a physical weight. Kevin Price and his soldiers guarded the rear of the group and watched for any sign of HFY forces that might have entered the structure through another opening, and the sergeant kept his weapon raised and ready. They found the central chamber at the heart of the megastructure, and Nathan stared in wonder at the massive space that opened before them like the inside of a hollow world. Katie approached a console that seemed to respond to her presence, and she worked to decipher the symbols and controls while Nathan waited with growing impatience. The sounds of the battle outside had faded to silence, and Nathan did not know if that meant his fleet had won or lost, or simply moved beyond the range of their communications. Katie finally managed to activate the ancient systems, and the megastructure hummed to life around them as lights flickered on, and machines that had been dormant for eons began to stir. And then the message played, and everything changed. It was a recording left by beings who had departed this universe so long ago that even the light from their era had faded into nothingness. And the message was translated automatically into human language by systems that had anticipated this moment. The architects had existed, and they had seeded life across countless galaxies, as the HFY texts had claimed. But the truth was far different from what the enemy had believed. The architects had grown beyond physical form and transcended to dimensions that humans could not comprehend. And they had left behind this megastructure as a monument to what they had once been. But the monument was empty, and there was nothing here for those who sought power or weapons or the secrets of creation. Message explained that life was meant to find its own path, and that no species should expect gifts from ancient gods who had moved on to realms beyond understanding. The architects had watched countless civilizations come to this place seeking easy answers and ultimate power, and every single one of them had found the same truth waiting at the end of their journey. There was nothing here, and there had never been anything here. And the megastructure was just a temple to a faith that had no deity waiting at its altar. Nathan Cole listened to the message and felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief washing over him. And he looked at Katie and saw tears streaming down her face. The HFY Supreme Hive Queen received the same transmission aboard her flagship, and her reaction was very different. From the quiet sadness of the humans, her species had sacrificed everything for 10,000 years and committed genocide across 100 worlds and burned 60 million humans to ash, all to find the architects and claim their blessing. And now she learned that there was nothing, that there had never been anything, that her entire civilization had been built on a lie that led to an empty room in the darkness between galaxies. Screams of the Hive Queen echoed through every Cathari ship as her mind shattered under the weight of the revelation, and her soldiers felt her anguish through the psychic link that bound their species. Together, the Cathari fleet fell into chaos as their purpose disintegrated, and faction turned against faction as subordinates blamed their leaders and commanders blamed their queen for leading them to this empty truth. Nathan watched through the viewport of his shuttle as Cathari ships began firing on each other, and he saw the Supreme Hive Queen's flagship explode under the combined assault of her own followers. The war was ending, not because humanity had won a military victory, but because the enemy had discovered that everything they believed was a lie. Commander Nathan Cole watched the Cathari tear themselves apart in the void between galaxies, and he felt no joy or satisfaction at the sight of his enemies destroying each other. The Supreme Hive Queen was dead, and her flagship was debris scattered across 10,000 kilometers of empty space. And the psychic shock of her death had driven the remaining Cathari into a frenzy of violence and confusion. Chris Morton brought the surviving human ships toward the megastructure and reported that they had lost 18 vessels and nearly 9,000 soldiers during the 3-day battle. And Nathan closed his eyes and mourned for the dead. But there would be time for grief later. And right now, they had to secure the area and eliminate the remaining Cathari forces before the enemy could regroup and remember that humanity was still their target. The cleanup operation took 2 weeks, and human soldiers moved through the wreckage hunting for survivors while the scientists explored every corner of the ancient megastructure. Katie Shaw led teams of researchers through chambers filled with technology that humanity could not begin to understand, and she documented everything she found, even though she knew it would take generations to decipher the secrets of the architect. Sergeant Kevin Price found photographs of his wife and daughter still tucked in his pocket when he returned to his bunk after the final battle, and he held them in his hands and wept for the first time since New Virginia burned. Amy Brooks recovered from her injuries in the medical bay and learned that she had been recommended for the highest military honors that humanity could bestow. And she told the nurses that she did not feel like a hero because heroes were supposed to save people, and all she had done was survive. Nathan Cole sent a transmission to Earth, reporting their victory and describing what they had found inside the megastructure. And he waited for a response while his crews rested and repaired their damaged ships. Admiral Lisa Harper received the report in her office and read it 3 times before she fully understood what Nathan was telling her. And she sat in silence for a long while, thinking about what it meant for humanity and for the galaxy. The Cathari Dominion was broken, not by weapons or tactics, but by the revelation that their entire civilization had been a lie, and the survivors were scattered across the void fighting each other instead of pursuing their ancient crusade. The megastructure was real, and the architects had existed. But there was no power to claim, and no secrets to unlock, and no easy path to greatness waiting for whoever found this place. Lisa summoned the United Earth Council and shared the report with the leaders of humanity. And they debated for days about what should be done with the megastructure and the knowledge it contained. Some argued that they should study the technology and try to reverse engineer whatever the architects had left behind. And they believed that even an empty temple might hold treasures that could advance human civilization by millions of years. Others wanted the megastructure destroyed because They feared that its existence would attract other species who might come seeking the same false hope that had driven the Cathari to genocide. In the end, they chose a middle path, and the megastructure was sealed with human security systems and marked with beacons that warned any ship approaching that the architects were gone and there was nothing here worth dying for. Nathan Cole led his fleet home through the void, and the journey back took another 8 months, during which the survivors had time to process what they had experienced and what they had learned. The Galactic Concord watched humanity emerge from the darkness beyond known space, and the 12 elder species finally understood that they had made a terrible mistake when they dismissed humans as harmless children. Humanity had faced genocide and responded not with surrender or despair, but with a fury that shocked every species in the galaxy. And they had traveled beyond the edge of known space and stood in the halls of beings older than the stars. They had discovered that there was no ancient power waiting to save them or destroy them, and they had come back changed in ways that the elder species could sense but not quite understand. Admiral Nathan Cole addressed the United Earth Council 1 year after the war ended, and his words were broadcast to every human world and station and ship across the galaxy. Told his people that they had learned something important during the war with the Cathari, and he wanted everyone to understand what that lesson truly meant. Humanity was not special because ancient beings had chosen them, and they were not powerful because of gifts from gods who had transcended the universe. They were what they had always been: survivors and fighters and dreamers who refused to accept extinction. And that was enough. The Cathari had believed that finding the architects would make them invincible, and that belief had driven them to commit horrors that would never be forgotten or forgiven. But humanity did not need ancient blessings to be great, and they did not need cosmic validation to justify their existence among the stars. Nathan looked into the cameras and spoke directly to every human who was watching, and he told them that the galaxy had awakened something it did not understand when it attacked their species. The monster was awake now, and it remembered everything that had been done to it, and it would never be caught sleeping again. But being a monster did not mean they had to become what the Cathari had been, and humanity could choose to use its strength to protect rather than to conquer. The elder species of the Galactic Concord would learn to respect humans not because of fear alone, but because humanity would prove that strength and mercy could exist together in the same civilization. The war was over, and 60 million human souls had paid the price for the galaxy's mistake, and nothing could bring them back or undo the suffering that had been inflicted. But humanity would honor the dead by building something better than what had come before, and the children of Earth would spread across the cosmos, not as conquerors, but as guardians who remembered what it felt like to be hunted. Nathan Cole finished his speech and stepped away from the podium, and across the galaxy humans looked up at the stars with new eyes and new understanding. They were alone in a universe that offered no easy answers and no ancient protectors. And that was perfectly fine because they had each other, and they had proven that they could survive anything the cosmos threw at them. The sleeping monster had awakened, and it had discovered that the greatest power in the universe was not some gift from vanished gods, but simply the will to keep fighting when everything seemed lost. And humanity would never stop fighting, not for conquest or glory or the approval of beings who had moved beyond comprehension, but for each other and for the children who would inherit the stars. The coordinates had promised something, and in the end there was nothing, but humanity had found what it truly needed anyway. They had found themselves.